Hi, this is Ted, and for the next hour, you'll be listening to a reading of articles and features from the Monday, March 16th New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And we'll start with this one. Professors are changing what they teach, even far from Trump's gaze. This is by Alan Blinder. Rewritten syllabuses, self-censored lectures, stilted classroom discussions, grant applications stripped of words that might infuriate President Trump and his allies if they're submitted at all. Many of the nation's professors are changing how they teach and research as Mr. Trump pursues a seismic reimagining of American higher education. Although the Trump administration has focused much of its ire on elite institutions, the government's tactics have unnerved people throughout academia. The consequences are trickling to campuses large and small, public and private. The White House insists that its campaign is essential to stamp out bigotry and rebuild eroded public confidence in an academic system that conservatives say is tilted against them. The quest to impose Trump's ideas, though, has been so rigid that some critics have likened it to how authoritarian leaders suppress free thought and dissent. Conservative states like Texas and Florida have rushed to follow Trump. Schools in more liberal places, including Northwestern in Illinois and Brown in Rhode Island, have sometimes acceded to federal demands. Faculty members who had fretted that academic culture had become too cloistered and political have sometimes welcomed the shifts. But in interviews in recent months and in written submissions to the New York Times, dozens of others described feeling stifled. Many of them spoke on the condition of anonymity because they feared retribution. The White House did not respond to a request for comment. The cadence of the federal attacks has outwardly slowed in recent months, with fewer abrupt crusades against specific universities or funding cuts that schools learned about through social media. Still, professors said they worry about administrators capitulating to Trump demands, as well as things like doxing and students recording their comments in class. You feel like an attack can kind of come from anywhere, right? Said Marin Pilud, an anthropology professor at the University of Nevada, Reno, a school that Trump has not overtly targeted. Then you can be a target from anyone. For the most part, colleges are still offering the same courses they were before Trump's election. But some professors say that classes have changed even if course names and numbers have remained intact. Christopher Kutz, a law professor at the University of California, Berkeley, said he is self-censoring to protect students, particularly those in the United States on visas. He said he worried that they might write or say something that could end up being turned against them. I'm not going to change what I say, but I will try to make sure the assignments don't invite students into making statements that could get them in trouble, said Professor Kutz, whose school has been a particular focus of the Trump administration. I have to think very hard about whether it's worth talking about something that's obviously clearly relevant to the course. Loyola University Chicago has not been targeted by Trump, but Norberto, I can't say this, Grzywacz, a neuroscientist and a former provost there, said he is worried about international students on his campus. They appear to be afraid of openly saying things, he said. Professor Kutz has weighed how much to discuss sensitive topics like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in courses about subjects like the ethics of war. In a declaration to a federal court last year, he cited what he thought the Trump administration viewed as disapproved subjects, including affirmative action, immigration, and transgender rights. It's a subjective sensation that I've never had before. I have to think very hard about whether it's worth talking about something that's obviously clearly relevant to the course, he said. Dr. Pilud said that she felt like she had to present ideas that were not scientifically sound, such as the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's new and widely disputed guidance about vaccines, so that she could say she had taught a broader array of viewpoints. My goal in class is to encourage intellectual debate, to develop the critical thinking skills, she said. Instead, she suggested, classes have become more superficial. I spend a little less time on interpretation and I kind of present more of both sides and the state of the topic, she said. Some professors described a fraying of the customary trust between teachers and students. Kylie Smith, who until recently taught at Emory University about the history of healthcare, said her area of expertise was inherently political. She came to fear how a student at Emory, which has sought to avoid the Trump administration's wrath, might weaponize her words. You just don't know whether they're going to report you to someone or are they recording you, she said. And she added that she felt she had to change the way I relate to my students. I value integrity and my authenticity and my openness and my honesty, and I feel myself not being that way with them, which I hate because that is what students value. A professor they can ask the hard questions of, she said. One part of her calculation last year, Dr. Smith said, was her status as a permanent resident, not a citizen of the United States. There have been times in class when they have asked me hard questions, and I would normally get up on my soapbox, and I've had to say, well, I think we're not going to talk about that today. Professor Zhivac is a naturalized citizen and hopes that that makes him a little immune from scrutiny. But, he said, he knows other faculty members born outside of the U.S. who worry about running afoul of federal officials who have proved willing to try to deport people over speech the Trump administration does not like. The environment is harder, he said. People are afraid, that's for sure. Some professors have welcomed how the Trump administration targeted diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and the academic cultures they fostered. Jessica Trisco Darden, an associate professor of political science at Virginia Commonwealth University, said she saw fewer students and faculty members announcing their personal pronouns or identity group during discussions. I think that was really limiting for discourse, but also for the ability for students to see the world in complex ways, she said. Terms like menstruating persons made it way too complicated for folks who are not heavily invested in those internecine definitional wars to be able to identify with. She no longer feels that way with Trump in power. She said she perceived less pressure to use terms like menstruating persons and that she sensed many students felt the same. The result, she said, was an ebbing of identity tribes among students and more open discussion. My students are no longer circumscribed in their beliefs, opinions, analyses by identity categories that people are ascribing to them, she said. The Trump administration has explicitly targeted federal research funding, a cornerstone of American academia's economic model for generations, with the most punitive cuts directed at a handful of schools. But the administration's approaches to DEI, abortion rights, gender transition care, and climate change, among other issues, are leading professors to narrow or recast their research ambitions, if they pursue them at all. Amanda Clark, a professor of molecular, cell, and developmental biology at the University of California, Los Angeles, said she had decided to rewrite my grants so that I would remove any language that would potentially compromise the funding of my work. A federal judge in San Francisco tried last year to limit research funding threats to the University of California system, but in an interview in December after the judge's ruling, Dr. Clark, a reproductive scientist who said she had often tried to speak about her work in an inclusive way, said the environment remained stressful. Faculty members are anxious that a stray or misinterpreted remark could make them or their schools targets of the White House. I feel a little frozen, she said. In Nevada, Dr. Pulud said the climate was impacting the type of research that I think I can do and that I can get funding for. She has not kept certain words out of grant applications. I just haven't even applied for any grants because I feel stuck, she said, noting that it was only recently that agencies were pushing researchers to include diversity and inclusion and to describe how their research would help marginalized populations. Dr. Pulud said she is lucky compared to the students coming up behind her. As a full professor, she said she has years of data that she can draw on for papers. Younger researchers do not. I definitely see it having a long-term impact on early career academics, she said. At some schools, the customary pathways to doing research have been cut off to young people entirely. From Michigan State to Harvard, some graduate programs have suspended or limited admissions because of uncertainties about federal funding. The changes could have lasting impact or consequences on American research. Dr. Smith, who came to Emory in 2015, has already done substantial work for a project about children with disabilities who are in juvenile detention. But she figured she would not get funding for it, and she was resistant to tailoring any applications to satisfy government officials she saw as ideologues. I really resented the idea that you should change the words so that you could get the funding, she said, adding, to me, that is compliance with fascism, and I'm not going to do it. Earlier this year, she moved to Australia. Censorship, she said, has never been an issue there. And another disturbing article. It doesn't need to be here. The right vilifies a Muslim school in Alabama by Robert Draper. In seventh grade history, the topic was Hannibal's invasion of Italy. In science class, a teacher dropped a chalkboard eraser to demonstrate the gravitational potential of energy. Down the hall, 16 third graders fielded questions about dhikr, a form of Islamic worship using repeated phrases to glorify God. The school, the Islamic Academy of Alabama, has occupied the same small cinder block building in the Birmingham suburb of Homewood for the past 3 decades. It is considered one of the state's highest performing K-12 institutions, with graduation and college acceptance rates close to 100%. Located on the same campus where a school for black children was burned down twice in the 1930s by the Ku Klux Klan, it had long gone without attracting controversy. Until last summer, that is, when school officials found a larger building to house its 270 students in an office park in the nearby community of Hoover. The response was, I didn't even know these people are here, and now they need a bigger building, said Brian Dawson, a Birmingham right-wing podcast host and chief executive of the Alabama outlet 1819 News. That's the alarm that went off in Hoover, Mr. Dawson helped lead a grassroots campaign against the building. And late last year, Hoover city officials voted against the school's relocation. The only place this Islamic academy should be moving is out of Alabama, said Alabama's senior U.S. Senator Tommy Tuberville, a Republican, on social media. Islamic indoctrination centers have no place in our state. The pushback against the Birmingham school plan reflects anti-Muslim sentiment and growing Islamophobia in conservative enclaves in America, as well as among GOP officials in Washington. In Oklahoma, a proposal by Tulsa Muslims to establish an Islamic center on a 15-acre plot in nearby Broken Arrow was scuttled in January following outcry from local conservative leaders and residents. Oklahoma needs leaders who will stand against evil, said T.W. Shannon, a former State House Speaker and now a candidate for lieutenant governor. In Texas, the proliferation of mosques in a rapidly diversifying state was characterized last month by the Texas Family Project, a socially conservative group, as a loud warning shot for Texans everywhere. In Georgia, where Muslims constitute 1.2% of the state's population, a Republican candidate for lieutenant governor, Greg Dolezal, released a campaign ad this month with AI-generated images of jihadists invading a suburban neighborhood. London has fallen, Europe is under siege, Mr. Dolezal said in a social media post alongside the ad. In America, the invaders who would rather pillage our generosity than assimilate are roaming Minnesota, New York, and LA. As lieutenant governor, I will fight the enemy before they're within the gates and keep Georgia safe and Sharia free. Representative Randy Fine, a Florida Republican who is one of the most brazenly anti-Muslim voices in Congress, said in an interview that being afraid of Islam is not irrational. He added, does that mean that all Muslims are terrorists? No, but too many of them are. The radical ones are the ones who don't want to kill us. What? And you're listening to a reading of articles and features on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Although the recent spasm of Islamophobia on the right is hardly new, it comes as President Trump has revived his anti-Muslim rhetoric from his first term. He has referred to Somali immigrants as garbage and recently said that the two Muslim Democrats serving in Congress, Representatives Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, should be sent back from where they came. His administration's indefinite pause on immigrant visa processing now includes more than 24 majority Muslim nations. The White House declined a request to comment for this story. The Trump administration's war against the overwhelmingly Shia Muslim nation of Iran could exacerbate such sentiments, said Matthew Dallek, a political historian and expert on right-wing movements at George Washington University. As American casualties mount and the bombing campaign creates more chaos in the Middle East, this kind of anti-Muslim bias on the right is likely to intensify, he said. At least 13 American service members have died in the first weeks of the war. The rising tide of Islamophobia on the right has not materialized out of nowhere. Its antecedents date back to the taking of 66 American hostages at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran in 1979, the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, and a decade later, the nativist underbelly of the Tea Party movement. The sentiments also coincide with Muslim populations moving into even the reddest of states, which has helped generate the view that immigration is bad and that immigrants are to be feared, said Mustafa Akyol, a senior fellow in Islam at the libertarian Cato Institute. Republican politicians hoping to unify Mr. Trump's base, which has been convulsed with bitter infighting over Israel, the release of the Epstein files, and the administration's economic policies, have pushed the incendiary rhetoric against American Muslims. The rhetoric is in contrast to former President George W. Bush's efforts after the September 11th attack by Islamic extremists to distinguish between religion, Islam is peace, he said at the time, and terrorists who he said were traitors to their faith. Times have changed. Whipping up anger against the Muslim world is a useful foil in this moment, said Mr. Dallek. It enables all of the factions on the right that are beginning to splinter to come together and remind one another why they were allies to begin with. In recent weeks, prominent conservatives have taken to the airwaves and social media to attack Muslims with undisguised bigotry. Muslims do not assimilate, said Katie Miller, the podcaster and wife of Stephen Miller, the architect of Trump's restrictive immigration policies. They aggregate, infiltrate, and conquer. You can never trust an Arab, said Laura Loomer, the right-wing media personality. On at least 3 occasions this month, Ms. Loomer has written on X, "Deport all Muslims from America." Representative Andy Ogles, Republican of Tennessee, posted online last week, "Muslims don't belong in American society." Tuberville, following his attack on the Islamic Academy of Alabama with a more sweeping broadside later in December, "Islam is not a religion," he wrote on social media, "it's a cult." Commenting on a photograph of Ghazala Hashmi, Virginia's newly elected lieutenant governor taking her oath of office with her hand on the Quran, Mr. Tuberville wrote, "The enemy is inside the gates." He repeated the same line last week in reference to an image of Mayor Zoran Mamdani of New York, which Tuberville posted on X alongside a photograph of the World Trade Center in flames on September 11th. Tuberville declined to be interviewed for this article. Instead, a spokeswoman referred to remarks that he made on the Senate floor on March 5th, in which he described Islam as a political ideology that encourages Muslims to kill all infidels. In simple terms, that means Americans and Christians. Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat of Maryland, called Tuberville's attack against American Muslims a vile new development. Bigots like Tuberville are trying to launch a religious war against American Muslims under the guise of protecting Western civilization, said Mr. Van Hollen. The KKK used the same Christian nationalist pretensions to go after Black Americans. This is a modern-day KKK. In interviews, faculty and students at the Islamic Academy of Alabama expressed bafflement that Tuberville would denounce the school without having first visited it. How would he even know who we are or what we do, said Felicity Lefebvre, a second grade teacher. My students don't even know what an infidel is. We're just normal students who want to learn, said Noran, 17, the school's valedictorian, who asked that her last name not be used for fear of inviting attacks on social media. When asked how Tuberville's comments about Islam made her feel, she replied, "Can I skip this question?" The two biggest fallacies that have been used against us, said Stacy Abdine, the Institute's acting principal, is that we're teaching Sharia law and teaching our students to kill all infidels, and both of those are blatantly untrue. Still, such fears about Islam persist among conservatives. The conservative influencer Ali Beth Stuckey said on social media in October that the greatest concern among her 840,000 Instagram followers is by far the growing influence of Islam. Similarly, the conservative youth activist group Turning Point USA polled its members in December and cited radical Islam as the nation's preeminent threat. That same month, conservative Republicans in Congress formed the Sharia Free American Caucus. Its membership includes around 45 House Republicans, among them the Majority Whip, Tom Emmer. The caucus has stated as its aim to counter the alarming rise of Sharia in the United States, although members have offered no data demonstrating such an uptick. It's kind of a ridiculous paranoia to think that this immigrant group representing less than 2% of the population is somehow going to take over and impose Sharia law, said Ilya Soman, a professor of law at George Mason University. Conservative leaders have countered by saying that such a takeover has already occurred in Europe. As Representative Chip Roy of Texas said in February, we're not going to let Dallas or Houston or any other city in this great country become what has happened to London and to Paris. While some Sharia councils exist in France and Britain, they function primarily to resolve civic conflicts in Muslim communities and possess no statutory authority. The European country with the largest Islamic minority is Bulgaria, said Mr. Akyol. But you never hear anyone say there's an Islamic problem in Bulgaria because they've been living there for more than 5 centuries, going back to the Ottoman Empire. Like the Italians and the Irish in America, they integrated into society over time. It's happening here with Muslims too. I see it as a success story. Despite Trump's anti-Muslim rhetoric, Mr. Akyol said that we've seen him make friends with Muslims. Those friendly relations include the Saudi royal family. The Trump family has shattered presidential ethic norms with multi-billion-dollar business deals in Saudi Arabia, and Mr. Mamdani. The president has not used these alliances to promote a more Muslim-friendly outlook among the right. I vividly remember when George Bush, after 9/11, went to the mosque in Washington to make the point that here in the U.S. we respect different faiths and we're all in this together against those who wish to hijack Islam for terroristic purposes, said Mr. Van Hollen. Today you've just got deafening silence from Trump and the rest of the Republican leadership. The closest thing on the right to a Muslim advocate has been Tucker Carlson, the conservative media personality and close ally of Mr. Trump. Speaking before a large audience at Turning Point USA's America Fest in December, Carlson described Muslims as mostly good and anti-Islamic sentiment as evil. The crowd responded with scant applause. Anybody who bows before God 5 times a day is probably not my main enemy, said Carlson. These are not the people responsible for thousands of Americans living without homes, addicted to drugs, and drawn into prostitution. I fully expect Tucker Carlson to be the next Ayatollah, said Mr. Fine, the Florida congressman. Back in Birmingham at the Islamic Academy of Alabama, school officials have vowed to continue searching for a new location for the academy. For now, at least, some students seem content to carry on their coursework where they are. Personally, I like being on a historic campus that was burned down by the KKK, said Yusuf Navi, 16, the president of the school student council. It feels more special than going to school in some new office building. But the school's future remains uncertain. Tuberville, who said on a radio broadcast in December that the school doesn't need to be here and we don't want people changing us, is considered the odds-on favorite to be elected the state's governor in November. Mr. Dawson, the right-wing podcaster who campaigned against the school, including by circulating "Don't Dearborn My Alabama" bumper stickers that made reference to the majority Arab city in Michigan, applauded Tuberville's views. There's not another senator in the U.S. that cares more about his people, which is why he's going to be the next governor. For his part, Dawson vowed that his news outlet would continue to keep an eye on the school. Asked if he would ever consider visiting it to gain a better sense of its activities, he said, "No, I don't have any desire to do that. Why would I want to learn something? We're watching the West being absolutely annihilated right now. I've seen everything I need to know." And here, for a little change of pace, how gin, wax, and heat guns make on-screen meals look delicious. I use artist paintbrushes and makeup brushes. Oh, excuse me, I've missed something. The Hamnet food stylist Olivia Somari reveals the tools of her trade. I use artist paintbrushes and makeup brushes, but I prefer makeup brushes because they're softer and I can blend and diffuse nicely with them. If I'm applying pigment to a marzipan peach, for example, it's the perfect tool. I always keep one clean brush for sweeping crumbs off a set. Renaissance microcrystalline wax polish. This is my favorite glue if what I'm making doesn't need to be edible. I was using it this morning to put gold leaf on duck eggs. It makes everything stay in place. Tack Life heat gun. This is useful for heating something to the point of melting, like if I want to get a nice cheese pool from a pizza or butter on toast. It can be too intense if I'm trying to get a jelly out of a mold or a pork pie out of its tin. So for that, I use my Dyson Airwrap, a dryer and stylist. Bird's Dream Topping. Dream Topping, a sweet powder that contains emulsifiers and is mixed with milk, behaves like cream, but it doesn't deflate as quickly. It's perfect for buttercream or mousse-like textures. I never go anywhere without a packet in my kit. Syringes. I made an edible lizard in Morocco for the third season of the Netflix series The Witcher and used a syringe to inject it with fake blood. I needed a few syringes because there was some discussion over whether the blood should be red or green, since some lizards bleed green. But the creative side wanted it to read unmistakably as blood on camera, which meant pushing the color much redder than it might naturally be. A bottle of gin. You can use it to prevent herbs from sliding. You can anchor sesame seeds with it. You can hold thin slices of citrus peel or petals in place. And it's ideal because it's clear. I picked up this trick when I was mentored by other food stylists who always have a bottle of gin or vodka in their kit. You never know when you're going to need to stick something down. Copper measuring cups. Your kit comes and goes. You gain and lose things at a rapid rate, so you can't be precious about it. Generally, I don't carry heirlooms or gifts from somebody important, but my mom gave me this copper measurer, and I use it when I'm making blinis because it's the perfect size. Kiwi Mini Cleaver. Food styling requires a constant state of micro-logistics. I like any tool that helps me stay in control on a smaller scale. I use this cleaver for chopping herbs or producing clean graphic lines. A food styling friend put me onto the brand Kiwi, which has affordable, long-lasting knives. Spoons. I collect spoons. Small ones are handy for things like canapes. I made an intricate tart for one of the dinner scenes in Hamnet, and I used little spoons to fill each pocket with a different flavor of jam. A bigger spoon would have flooded the pattern. Mini tongs. Any tool that acts as an extension of your hands is helpful on set. These are perfect for topping up plates of food or when I need to move things in bulk. I use them constantly on the show Masters of the Air during the soldiers' breakfast scenes, where we had to dress plates for 200 actors. And you're listening to a reading of Articles and Features on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. And now we'll jump to some opinion pieces. And we'll start with David French. We have reached end stage polarization. Does anyone think a healthy nation with a healthy political culture would elect a man like Donald Trump not once, but twice? The eternal return of Trump is a sign of our national sickness, and a recent Pew Research Center study shows us exactly what that sickness is. We despise one another, and demagogues rise when hatred increases. It's as predictable as night following day. In a 25-country survey, which included a cross-section of European, Asian, African, and American nations, the U.S. was the only country in which a majority of adults surveyed said that the morality and ethics of their fellow citizens were either bad or somewhat bad. Even countries torn apart by violence and civil strife, countries like Nigeria and Mexico, had higher views of their fellow citizens. We've known for a long time that America is deeply polarized, and we've known the problem is only getting worse. For example, in a 2022 survey, Pew found that large shares of Democrats and Republicans thought of each other as closed-minded, dishonest, immoral, and unintelligent, and the measurements were getting worse every year. Both sides hate each other so much that it's almost meaningless to ask who hates whom the most. In the morality and ethics survey I mentioned at the start of the column, Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents were more likely to believe that other Americans were unethical or immoral than Republicans. But in the 2022 survey, Republicans were more likely to believe that Democrats were dishonest, immoral, and lazy. If you're a Republican or a Democrat, the best way to imagine the other side's view of you is to simply mirror your own attitude. They despise you with the same intensity that you despise them. They view you with the same sense of threat and alarm that you view them. To say that both sides view each other with equivalent disdain is not to say that both sides are equally dangerous. When a hateful, vengeful man is in the Oval Office wielding the awesome power of the presidency beyond its constitutional limits, then he immediately becomes the most dangerous person in America. But the urgent necessity of defending our republic from his assaults on the Constitution, from his intense cruelty, and from his profound corruption shouldn't blind us to the divisions that helped bring him to power. American hatred is growing so great that partisans, perversely enough, often view kindness and tolerance from political opponents as a threat. The only good people are people who agree with them. The supposedly decent person on the other side, we have a name for him or her, a wolf in sheep's clothing. This reality came home to me once again after the column I wrote last week was published. My argument was simple. I very much disagree with James Tallarico, the Democratic nominee for Senate in Texas, on many important issues, most notably his stance on abortion. At the same time, however, I very much appreciate his condemnation of the politics of hatred and vitriol, and his appeal to the better angels of our nature is giving voters hope that this miserable political moment may one day come to an end. In a CBS interview days after his primary victory, Tallarico said, "My faith teaches me to love my neighbor as myself, not just my neighbor who looks like me or prays like me or votes like me. I'm tired of being pitted against my neighbor," he continued. "I'm tired of being told to hate my neighbor. And I think in Texas, across the political spectrum, there is a deep hunger for a different kind of politics, one that's rooted in love. That old politics that we've been suffering under for the last 10 years, politics as blood sport, as trolling and owning, as total war, that politics is dying. That isn't just a virtuous approach to political differences, it's a deeply Christian approach to political differences. After all, what does it mean to love our enemies if we do not demonstrate patience and kindness toward them?" The online response to my argument, however, was volcanic. I was accused of legitimizing heresy. Another writer said that I'd suffered an apparent brain injury. My appreciation of Tallarico's approach even put the soul of evangelicalism at risk. Once again, I was written entirely out of the Christian faith by angry Trumpist evangelicals. I did have to laugh at the Babylon Bee's joke headline: David French praises Satan as most Christian person in history. Whew. In their minds, I was elevating niceness over justice and righteousness. To this way of thinking, Tallarico's manner makes him more dangerous, not less, and it was my responsibility to warn Christian America away from this dreadful man. In their anger and vitriol, I saw the mirror image of the far left intolerance I've encountered throughout much of my career. There are people who can't conceive of the idea that a pro-life Christian can be a decent person, or that a person who, for example, opposes surgical and medical interventions for youth gender transition or trans women's participation in female sports can have any redeeming qualities at all. I'm fully aware that to them I'm the wolf in sheep's clothing, because I hide what they see as religious and political extremism behind a veneer of civility and pluralism. Civility itself is a questionable value. It's a version of respectability politics when the times call for direct, aggressive action against your evil political opponents. This approach is profoundly dangerous to our republic. The American constitutional system is, at its heart, a dispute resolution mechanism. It takes all the differences and divisions inherent in a continent-sized, multi-ethnic, multi-faith democracy and channels them into a political system marked by checks and balances and firewalls against tyranny. In the United States, there should never be any such thing as a winner-takes-all electoral result. Even the worst losers and everyone else in American politics enjoy the protections of the Bill of Rights and the opportunity to try to win again very soon in election cycles that arrive with clockwork regularity every 2 years. But hatred puts this system to its most severe test, a test we've faced over and over again. It is relatively easy to support the civil rights of people you like, even if you disagree with them. It is profoundly difficult to support the civil rights of people you hate. Or, as John Adams wrote in his 1798 letter to the Massachusetts militia, we have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Avarice, ambition, revenge, or gallantry would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a well goes through a net. Restrain those vices and we preserve our republic. Indulge them and we risk its dissolution. On Thursday, a federal appellate judge, Lawrence Van Dyke, issued a truly remarkable dissent, a textbook example of how not to handle disagreement on profoundly important constitutional issues. The Ninth Circuit had denied a petition to rehear en banc an opinion upholding the state of Washington's law against discrimination against a challenge brought by two Washington spas that banned men and preoperative transgender women who have not yet received gender confirmation surgery affecting their genitalia. The spas are Korean spas where customers are typically nude in communal bathhouses. Under the current interpretation of Washington's law, which the Ninth Circuit sided with, women and some girls could be exposed to the sight of male genitalia without their consent, an act that, in different circumstances, could constitute indecent exposure or sexual harassment. I disagree with the Ninth Circuit's conclusion that the First Amendment does not grant the spa the right to exclude customers with penises from receiving the spa services. But I also know that the interaction between non-discrimination statutes and the First Amendment is complex. There will always be competing and overlapping interests in play, and line drawing can be difficult. But this is how Van Dyke began his dissent. This is a case about swinging dicks. Yes, you read that correctly. And then he doubled down. The fact that so many on our court want to pretend that this case is about anything other than swinging dicks, he wrote, is the very reason the shocking language is necessary. No, the shocking language was wholly unnecessary. It's worse than unnecessary. It's further damaging our political culture. It's a court opinion as a 4chan post, an own-the-lib statement that brings thunderous applause from the angry right, but communicates nothing but scorn and contempt for the opposition. To call for decency doesn't deny the depths of our disagreement. It does, however, acknowledge the essential humanity of our opponents. I keep thinking about the commitment card that Martin Luther King Jr. asked his followers to sign before they joined the 1963 Birmingham campaign. The 10 directives included these admonitions: meditate daily on the teachings and life of Jesus. Remember always that the nonviolent movement seeks justice and reconciliation, not victory. Walk and talk in the manner of love, for God is love, and refrain from the violence of fist, tongue, or heart. Does anyone believe King was not dedicated enough to justice, or that he was ineffective in his quest to transform American culture and politics? His love and regard for others, even as he fought desperately for civil and economic and political rights, were indispensable to his success. They're what make reconciliation possible, even if we're still far from perfect. I disagree with Tallarico on many things, but I also agree with his desire to reject politics as a blood sport. And unless we can remember, as King did, with his life perpetually on the line, to seek both justice and mercy, then we'll be left with neither. Another piece, this is by Jacqueline McGuire, who was a special agent for the FBI from 2000 until 2025. And it's called I Was an FBI Agent for 25 Years. Kash Patel is playing a dangerous game. I became a special agent for the FBI in 2000, and over the following years, I saw the Bureau transform. Leading up to the September 11th attacks, it had been focused primarily on its criminal work, such as uncovering mafia activity, investigating violent and white-collar crime, and rooting out drug trafficking. And it had arguably been distracted from the threat by al-Qaeda that had taken root in the United States. But after that terrible day under Robert Mueller's leadership, the FBI evolved quickly, bolstering its national security work to better prevent terrorist attacks, its top priority. I left the FBI last year having held multiple leadership roles overseeing counterterrorism and criminal investigations. I was pushed out of my post along with 7 other senior executives. The Bureau remains strong thanks to the talented and dedicated men and women serving within it. But the ousters of dozens of experienced personnel since Trump took office, some of whom handled threats from Iran, represent a dangerous fact about the current leadership. Kash Patel is consumed by politically motivated revenge and conspiracy theories, distracting the FBI once again from the danger of terrorism. The spreading war with Iran significantly elevates the regime's threat to Americans at home and abroad, meaning that the FBI must return its focus to its core work, protecting Americans from terrorists and cyber attacks, and halting foreign intelligence operations and espionage. Even before the war, Iran posed a serious threat. It is the world's most prolific state sponsor of terrorism, and through its proxies and its own direct recruitment abroad, culpable for the deaths of hundreds of Americans. It supported Hezbollah when it killed 240 American service members with the powerful car bomb in Beirut in 1983. In 1996, it was responsible for an attack in Saudi Arabia that murdered 19 service members. And in recent years, it has increasingly targeted Americans at home, using its own direct network controlled by the Quds Force of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, the external operations branch of the Ayatollah's powerful military force. In one case, it planned to kidnap a U.S. citizen of Iranian origin who publicly opposed the Iranian government, only to hire Russian mobsters to try to murder her instead. After the FBI arrested the mobsters, an IRGC asset hired local operatives who stalked her for months until the FBI arrested them too. The IRGC had tasked that same asset with concocting a plan to assassinate Trump. Iran also poses a cyber threat. Hackers affiliated with the IRGC have successfully attacked American water and wastewater systems facilities, disabled bank websites, and prevented customers from logging onto their online accounts. Those financial attacks collectively cost American businesses millions of dollars to neutralize the threat and mitigate the consequences. Against that backdrop, The current sophomoric leadership of the FBI is concerning. Mr. Patel's rushed judgments and prolific social media posts undercut the Bureau's professionalism. He hastily posted misleading tweets about the investigation into Charlie Kirk's murder and the Brown University shooting. He mischaracterized Alex Preddy's actions before his fatal shooting in Minneapolis and claimed falsely that Mr. Preddy had violated Minnesota's gun laws. He has frolicked at the Olympics, formed a nonsensical partnership with the Ultimate Fighting Championship, and consistently engaged in combative behavior during congressional testimony, moves that suggest his focus is not on the most pressing threats this country faces. Patel's retaliatory firings are particularly harmful now. Dismissing personnel out of spite for no valid reason makes the U.S. less safe, especially when some of those fired employees were steeped in the sort of counterintelligence work that prevents Iranian attacks. And you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Patel is fond of saying that his goal is to let good cops be cops. In leading the FBI, his job is to let good special agents be special agents. FBI agents are trained to use intelligence and technology to advance investigations into federal crimes such as terrorism and cyber attacks. They are not trained to patrol city streets or to enforce immigration laws, as Patel has had them do. There are about 13,000 FBI agents and roughly 700,000 full-time sworn state and local law enforcement officers in the U.S. The Bureau must work with law enforcement partners to address effectively issues including violent crime, but agents aren't cops, and their skills are best directed at neutralizing the most significant threats. Are we less safe than we were a year ago? I hope not. I continue to trust the expertise and dedication of the FBI's workforce, but the Bureau's personnel deserve strong, knowledgeable, engaged leadership. They must be allowed to protect the American people and uphold the U.S. Constitution, and that starts with our national security. Let's hope it doesn't take another September 11th to snap the FBI's leadership into action. And finally, Nicholas Kristof. Does Trump risk turning America into a rogue state? Suppose Iran dispatched operatives to Mexico, where from the Texas border they fired a missile at an American base and unintentionally but carelessly demolished a nearby American school, killing 175 people. What if they then blew up fuel depots, showering a chemical rain on residents, then struck homes, schools, and clinics as Iran's leader warned that death, fire, and fury would so pulverize America that it could never be rebuilt? In that case, President Trump and all of us would howl at outrageous attacks on innocent civilians, and we'd be right. War achieved an industrial savagery in World War II. After the firebombing of Tokyo, the United States boasted that it might have killed more people, perhaps 100,000, in 6 hours than ever before in history. After the war, in sober reflection, the United States helped lead a global effort to try to tame the savagery of conflict and, in particular, to shield civilians. The additional protocols to the Geneva Conventions, for example, stipulate that it is impermissible to destroy infrastructure that civilians depend on, such as drinking water infrastructure. In recent years, that veneer of civilization has seemed to slip away. After invading Ukraine, Russia bombed civilians and cut off their heat and electricity. In Gaza, Israel starved Palestinians, targeted children, and destroyed healthcare and education systems, according to a UN commission. In Sudan, the United Arab Emirates has backed a militia that has starved civilians and engaged in mass murder and mass rape. The United States supplied weaponry used in Gaza and has failed to call out the Emirates, but it still, inconsistently, half-heartedly, professed to uphold the laws of war. Now in Iran, I fear we may be retreating even further from the principles we once proclaimed, loosening the shackles that civilized nations place on themselves to protect our shared humanity. The attack on Iran appeared to violate international law, said Una Hathaway, a Yale legal scholar and the president-elect of the American Society of International Law, because it neither had UN approval nor was necessary for immediate self-defense. Beyond that, while it is too early to be definitive, some of the American and Israeli strikes raise troubling questions about possible war crimes. The apparent U.S. bombing of a girls' school, reportedly killing about 175 people, is not necessarily a war crime if it was an honest mistake, Hathaway said. But the Times reported that the targeting employed old data. If that reflected a reckless lack of care, it might rise to a war crime, she said. Iran reported that the United States had struck a desalination plant providing water to 30 villages, although the U.S. and Israel denied responsibility. The Iranian Red Crescent Society also said that attacks had hit more than 17,000 homes, 65 schools, and 14 medical centers. UNICEF reports that more than 1,100 children have been killed or injured in the war so far in multiple countries. David Crane, an American legal scholar and former prosecutor for war crimes, said that if a site like a desalination plant was used primarily for civilian purposes, striking it would be a war crime. He lamented that we are now in an age of lawless conflict, propelled in part by the United States. I worry that if Trump grows increasingly frustrated and exhausts the target lists, he may be tempted to strike dual-use civilian infrastructure, such as the electrical grid or highways and bridges, so as to punish Iran and inflict broader misery that might provoke unrest. Indeed, the president and those close to him seem to be telegraphing such an approach. We will hit them so hard that it will not be possible for them or anybody else helping them to ever recover that section of the world if they do anything, Trump told reporters. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth denounced stupid rules of engagement and dismantled the Pentagon office that sought to reduce civilian casualties in war. Senator Lindsey Graham boasted that we're going to blow the hell out of these people. Aren't they brave? On social media, Trump warned that if Iran obstructs the Strait of Hormuz, the United States will make it virtually impossible for Iran to ever be built back as a nation again. Death, fire, and fury will rain upon them. As Phillips O'Brien, an American scholar of military strategy, put it, one might say he was threatening to commit one of the greatest war crimes in history. Other countries have noticed. While some leaders have applauded the attack on Iran, Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez of Spain described the American and Israeli war on Iran as reckless and illegal. The Swiss defense minister said that the American attack violated international law. Dominique de Villepin, a former French prime minister, called the American war illegal, illegitimate, ineffective, and dangerous, and urged sanctions. In some eyes, Trump is taking us a step toward becoming a rogue state. There are more practical reasons to oppose Trump's war. Overall, it has not toppled Iran's dictatorship and might have strengthened it. We helped install a younger supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, who may be even harder line than his father. Blockage of the Strait of Hormuz raises gas prices and threatens supplies of fertilizer. Despite immense cost in lives and treasure, both the American and Iranian people seem, for now, to be in a worse place than before Trump started the war. Wesley Clark, a retired four-star Army general, pointed to the practical challenges and lack of strategy and told me the war is going off the rails. Step back, though, and the legacy may be even more chilling. The rules-based scaffolding meant to restrain the worst excesses of war is cracking, warned Tom Fletcher, the UN humanitarian chief. I fear that he's right, and that we are sliding ever deeper into a world where there are no longer any rules, as Germany's Vice Chancellor Lars Klingbeil put it, and it is the United States that is helping to lead the way. In short, long after this war is behind us, we may remember it as part of a repudiation of the noble historical effort that we once led to limit the horrors of war. If so, all humanity is the loser. And you've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. This is Ted. I hope you enjoyed it to the extent that these articles can be enjoyed, but they are informative. And I look forward to talking to you next week. Thank you for listening. Bye.